r/AskReddit. Police of Reddit. What dumb call turned serious very quickly. Deputy friend of mine ended up getting hospitalized after responding to a call of a home intruder. There wasn't a home intruder, but there was a very large, aggressive turkey that bit him in the ass hard enough he needed stitches. Happy Thanksgiving, mother ducker munch. Keep the change, you filthy animal. Sheriff Deputy here. During patrol I started noticing at one house that their packages being delivered at their front door weren't being taken inside. A lot of these packages were groceries. I also noticed their mail wasn't being brought in. Usually the postal service mentions something when they see this, but I brought it upon myself to do a welfare check. I arrived at the door and knocked. No answer. I knocked a few more times. No answer. I started thinking maybe the person that lives there may be gone for a while. I decided to take one peek through the front window and I saw an elderly woman laying on the ground. I announced to dispatch what I saw and I'm entering the house immediately. Luckily I didn't have to kick the front door down and instead discovered the back door was unlocked. I entered the house and the lady was alive, but due to her older age, she wasn't able to stand back up on her own strength after falling and has been laying on the ground for 2 days. I got paramedics to arrive and take her to a nearby hospital. I found her phone book with personal numbers in her kitchen and called her adult children and notified them of what happened. They were very relieved and drove to the hospital to help care for her. As a person with elderly parents who probably shouldn't be living alone, but do anyways because they're stubborn, make sure you contact them every day, or at least every other day. My parents are both 70, divorced 20 years ago, live separately, both have major health problems, dad with Parkinson's, mom with COPD. I converse via text with each of them at least once a day, just so I know they're doing okay, and I know they appreciate the interaction with me, even if it is short. Just a simple "how are you feeling today" is all it takes. My grandfather had a standing call with his eldest son every night. One evening he missed the call and his daughter was concerned but lived 70 miles away. The son didn't want to drive over 15 miles to check on him and just figured he went to bed early. They found him on the floor, broken hip and broken arm. The next day, he died in the hospital a week later. Always check in with the elderly every day. All it takes is one full. Deputy here. It was a Saturday night and I had a call for an erratic vehicle, unable to stay in lane, speeding, etc. Everyone assumed it was a routine dwee because it was Saturday night and started looking. Well, she passed me on a main road, so I turned around and conducted a traffic stop. She stopped her car in a terrible place, so I approached on the passenger side. She was very angry and disrespectful and she wouldn't turn to look at me, just looked forward. I could smell alcohol, wasn't sure if it was coming from her or the vehicle. I asked for her license and registration to run her information. I decided I was going to talk to her more on the driver's side to see if I could find signs of impairment. When I walked over to her side, I saw the entire left side of her face was bruised and blood was coming out of her mouth. Also a bruise on her neck in the shape of a hand and fingers. I had her step out to ask about it. She informed me her boyfriend got drunk and thought she was cheating on him and decided to hold her down by the neck and punch her approx 10 times. She had major swelling and the blood was a cut from her cheek against her teeth. It took 25 minutes to convince her to give me his information. She told me he lives in a neighboring state and the incident occurred there. I called the neighboring state police and informed them. Found out the guy had 3 felony warrants and they have been looking for him. Edit. Thanks for the gold and silver. So was she just driving to get away from him, or trying to get to the hospital? She was heading home. About an hour and a half drive for her. She didn't want to go to a hospital and RMA when EMS showed up. Police here. Got a call of some lady refused to get out of the bathroom. It's around 2 AM and the cleaning crew of a restaurant let her inside, but she didn't want to leave. It's raining and cold outside. I think it was January. We get there and another set of officers from a nearby precinct respond because it's boring when it's cold and raining. The lady comes out dressed in simple pajamas, no shoes or socks, holding an infant wrapped in a baby blanket, no jacket, no coat, no warm anything, just button-down pajamas and her tiny infant. All of us are like, Polyp. They aren't dressed for this weather at all. The mom looks pretty normal. as in she's not a transient. We learn later she's a brain surgeon and lives in a very swank condo. Turns out she walked 6-8 blocks down the street in the rain dressed like this. Then the mother displays behavior attributed to mental health disorders. Starts screaming they are trying to kill her. Gets incredibly manic. Hunches down and her eyes go wild. But she's holding that baby tight. We know she needs to go to a psych hospital, but we have to get the baby away first. We plead we want to help her. Just let us hold the baby. She won't, of course, because in her mind we're all trying to kill her. At one point she whispers, kind of spooky, give me a gun and I'll do it myself. We swarm her. 2 for the baby and 2 on her and she's screaming bloody murder. It was unnerving to say the least. My partner and I took the call. Report. We get a hold of dad and take the baby back to him. He didn't realize she had left. He's a doctor too. He mentioned she didn't want to take her psych meds anymore and hadn't taken them in about a week. Lesson learned. If you need psych meds, please take your meds. Don't ever think you're all better without them. Edit. We took the mother to a PSCH hospital for a 72-hour eval. Hope she got back on her feet. But we don't know. That's so sad and scary. Do you know if she was okay? This sounds like puerperal psychosis. Is specific to the time period following childbirth. She won't have been cognitive enough to remember to take medication. This is a serious psychological disorder relating to hormone issues and the woman urgently requires attention by a psychiatric team who can deal with this specific situation, as isolation from the baby can make it worse. But the safety of the baby is to be taken into consideration. It often resolves successfully, but maternal deaths linked to suicide remain one of the biggest killers of new mums. Source: NBRACE report. I am a midwife in the UK and PP is a considerable factor in this. It was dumb and routine before we got there. It was a local, well-known, drunken criminal jack of all trades who was playing with fireworks. Not an uncommon thing. However, he was in his living room, and they were very powerful and illegal. He was entertaining himself by lighting the wick and putting it out. He wasn't quick enough one time. The mortar went through his roof, blasted the storm door off the hinges into the front yard. His torso lacerated. Intestines needed to be pushed back in and sewn up. About a year later, almost to the day, he got in a fight with his girlfriend on the interstate highway. At some point they pulled over. He got out. Doors were locked, so he climbed on the hood. She started driving and he fell off. Wasn't even in very bad shape. He was shirtless, of course, and I saw the surgery scars from the year prior. Natural selection is working hard on this one. With some people, it seems like even death doesn't want them. Dude broke into house. Pretty standard burglary. Dude takes the homeowner's katana and is playing with it as the guy returns home. The guy doesn't leave or call the police and proceeds to fight the guy who has his sword in a brawl. No one died, but the burglar got a number done to him, so he wasn't very good at sword skills. Burglar should have spent less time partying and having premarital sex. This is why you study the blade. I got the opposite response here. Got a call that a woman was giving birth, so me and a rookie head on over to the address. Rookie was super excited to get to help with this since he hadn't gotten the opportunity yet. So we pull up and his face drops. It's a 50-year-old method up woman rolling and screaming in her grass saying that she's giving birth to her dog. Anyways, I tell my partner to fuck on out of here and go help the woman deliver that dog. That call went from serious to pretty dumb very quickly. Well, was the dog delivered okay? No idea. We had to fuck on out of there after the paramedics picked her up. Not a cop. This happened outside my college residence and I imagine they had a laugh at this before they showed up because my roommates and I sure did. This kid was all messed up on some kind of drug and was screaming and beating the shit out of a backhoe loader that had been left there overnight due to some construction work going on campus. Obviously construction equipment is generally made out of pretty thick steel, so it's not like he was doing much damage. By this point campus security had been by and I'm assuming we're like, duck this, we need the real police, because they just stopped for 10 minutes and then kept driving. I'm assuming this is the point where the police were called. Turns out some dumbass left the keys in the machine. You know, cause that's what you do on a college campus full of drunk teenagers. So this kid somehow figures out how to start it and proceeds to drive straight forward into the backup generator for the residence building across from mine, knocking it off its concrete pad and crushing it up against the wall. Then tried to back up, but the cops have arrived at this point and blocked his escape. He then tries to drive over the lawn to get away, but since he can't figure out how to raise the bucket up, he can't get over the curb and ends up bending the shit out of the bucket by hitting the concrete repeatedly. Obviously was arrested on the spot. Actually, with heavy equipment it is common practice to just leave the keys in. Yep, key under the seat at pretty much every farm I've worked on. Also, most heavy machinery have more or less the same kind of key as well. Old job I worked at, we used a grinder down screwdriver to start most of the equipment. UK cop went to a run-of-the-mill slow-time domestic appointment, single crude. Arrive at the address and both parties are present and it's a small one-bed flat. Try to speak to both separately but neither speaks much English and the male wouldn't leave the female who was the victim alone. Me attendance was due to a call the previous night from a friend of the female due to her not speaking much English. Neither party speak much English but enough for basic questions. I asked simple questions and got told nothing was wrong. Begun questioning on information that I already had from the call and the female has denied everything, but things didn't feel right. I begin to arrange for one of my colleagues who spoke the same language to call the female and speak to her over the phone to ask questions that the male couldn't hear. As I was doing so, she goes to the bathroom and comes back out a short time later. She has stood back by her partner but slightly behind him, and when he is speaking G to me, she pulls up her sleeve of her shirt and has written "Help me" on the top of her arm just above where her sleeve stopped. I have quickly got another unit on scene with me and my colleague spoke to her on the phone after we managed to separate them, and she has disclosed an assault the night before where he has grabbed her by the throat and thrown her into a windowsill. He gets locked up and I have arranged for her to come and speak to my colleague back at the station, where she discloses this wasn't the first occasion but is the first time she had spoken to the police, where he had previously beat her with a golf club for being late. Would hate to think what could have happened if I had left after she said she hadn't called the police. Whoa, there has to be so many times cops are just trying to figure out what is going on. Good for her to figure out how to signal you and good for you for sticking around a bit. Whoa, that's Hollywood-esque. The writing on the arm is so awesome. So smart. I love that woman. And you, for an excellent service to your community. Not a cop, but this is a story from my criminal justice professor from college, who was a cop in North Carolina. There was this house she and her partner had to visit frequently for domestic disputes between a grown son and his wheelchair-bound father. It was never that bad. Mostly just yelling, and the neighbors would call the police to check on them. No charges were ever pressed, so they'd usually just check in and be on their way. They got another one of those calls one day thinking it'd be the same as usual. This time the son is waiting outside for them. The partner is still questioning the son, and thinking the old man wasn't gonna be a threat, she goes inside to deal with him on her own. She announced herself and approached him to talk. He doesn't say anything but suddenly grabs for her gun. She pinned the gun and his hands to her side and tried punching him, pepper spraying, anything she could think of to get him to let go. Eventually her partner heard her screaming and ran in to disarm him, and he was taken away. He later admitted he was gonna shoot her and then his son, and she was pretty shaken up after that. And that's why I left patrol duty to become a teacher. Hockey shit. Former police officer, dispatched to a possible disturbance as soon as I got to work to relieve the day, guys. Call came in that the neighbors are having a heated discussion and there might be a gun, but they didn't see one. I got a car as quick as I could and headed that way. Dispatch advised the suspect had left and was driving east towards me. I found the vehicle matching the description and tried to do a traffic stop, but he wouldn't stop. It wasn't high speed or anything, he just didn't want to stop. Using turn signals and everything, he finally pulled over, due to the possibility of a gun, and having no context as to why the caller thought there was a gun. I was cautious. I drew my pistol and had it in low ready, gave orders for him to step out of the vehicle like in any felony stop. He ignored them. Backup arrived, so we decided to approach with caution and lethal cover. I got up to about 15 feet of his door, and he kicked it open, stuck the gun to his head and committed suicide. Turns out, he was involved in some kind of old love triangle. The caller was not the neighbor, but his old squeeze, and the suspect had just left his wife. Showed up to the victim's house, pointed a gun at her husband and said he was there to kill him, and the wife called us under the guise of just a witness. Despite them having multiple conversations, the suspect wanted her to leave her husband, and the suspect left his wife assuming that was gonna happen, but it didn't. Then I got behind him and turned on my lights. I'm glad he didn't make me kill him, but I wish it could have went a different way, and after a small stint in a psychiatric hospital and maybe a month or 2 of jail time, he would be alive. This may not seem too serious quickly, but about 6 months before that, I did the routine traffic stop, and as I walked up to the driver door to get his license, the bullet he shot himself with barely missed me. He had a felony warrant from another state and was going to spend a very long time in prison. So needless to say, traffic stops are never, and never should be, considered routine. I hope you got therapy. I wish police and prisons had funding for major ongoing mental health training. Not a cop. Paramedic here. The police and I were called to a public intoxication. No idea why medics were called, but anyway, the guy was hammered and had been stranded by his drinking buddies because he didn't want to get into the car. Good for him. He was on the phone when I got there and he handed it to me and said I can't talk to her. So I took the phone from him and hung it up and handed it back. Turns out he wanted me to talk to her for him. Whoops. He went ballistic and threw a punch at me. And as he was punching, the cop put a boot in his back. Great reaction time. Still don't know how he did it. The guy ended up smashing his face on the road and suffered a concussion plus some other stuff. This was years ago and I still remember because I felt so guilty at the time. Bro, you made it to the end? You're a ducking beast. I'll cut you a deal. Smash like and subscribe for more curated content. It's free and that's a great price.